people have completely lost faith in the government. They did everything they could to smear all of Trump's cabinet picks. And if they can't find anything, they make it up. If you think you're a victim, you are a victim. That's a state of mind. If you always tell the truth remains the truth. You don't have to try to remember what you said 3 months ago. It cost the taxpayers over $1 million to prove that I was innocent.
Our founding fathers here in this country brought about the idea that you and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-thought lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction.
Welcome back to another episode of America Don't Give Up, and I'm your host, Christian Hodges. Before we get into the conversation today, I'm honored to introduce today's guest. He's been someone I've looked up to for a while, and for this semester, I've been able to work with him and his think tank here in D.C. So I'm pleased to welcome the former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, former world-renowned neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins, and founder and chairman of American Cornerstone Institute, none other than Dr. Ben Carson. So Dr. Carson, I appreciate you making the time to come on today.
Well, thanks for having me, Christian. Thanks for the fantastic job you've been doing during your internship with HCI and in
Thank
the
you.
rest of your activities, including with this podcast.
Very kind words, sir. I appreciate that. So if we look back since November 5th, we're almost right in the middle of November 5th and January 20th. I think there's about 35 days until inauguration, and we're just over a month away from the election. But a lot has happened in that month. We've seen almost what we can call the Trump effect of not even being president, just being president-elect, and almost turning this country around already. We've seen everyone's agreeing to these peace deals. Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire. Ukraine or Russia want to come to the table. China's ready to start a new page with the United States. The tariffs, we saw it happen with Prime Minister Trudeau, and then what Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, has done since what Tom Home has done on the border. He's not even border czar yet, and he's already taking meeting with Eric Adams in New York, spending days on the border with Governor Abbott. All these things have happened since November 5th. It's been a lightning quick turnaround of this country. And what do you think has been Trump's art of the deal? How does he do this? You know him on a personal level. What makes him tick? And what's his X factor that allows him to lead so well?
Well, the key thing about Trump is you never have to really wonder about what he's thinking. He will tell you what he's thinking, and he's very clear about it. He's very transparent. And I think that's what people really appreciate because, we've gone through a dark period where people have completely lost faith in the government, completely lost faith in whatever they tell you, from our public health services to our military, to, the White House in general, gaslighting people, telling people that what you're seeing is not real, what you're hearing is not real, what you're feeling is not real. Just listen to us. We'll tell you what you should really feel. And people aren't stupid. And, to place them in that situation, I think is a very bad mistake. I'm not sure that the left recognizes that yet. Maybe they don't. As good as they don't, because they'll continue to lose. Because the people are the safeguard for our democratic republic, the way it was set up. Our founders knew that eventually we would reach a point where there would be government overreach, where the government would be trying to take over our lives. And the reason they knew that is because they studied every government that ever existed. And they saw that they all tend to move in that direction. And that's why they empowered the people. That's why our Constitution was written the way that it was. And we have to really pay attention to the 10th Amendment, which says, if an issue is not addressed in the Constitution, then it inures back to the state and to the people. and that way you don't have the government meddling in every aspect of your life, which they don't do because they're evil. They do because they're governments, and that's what governments do. And that's why we have to guard against it. And we saw that happen in this election in a very, very dramatic and powerful way. And Trump represents that. He represents we the people in a very effective way because you could see the forces of entrenched government trying to destroy him in every way that they could, trying to financially bankrupt him, trying to put him in jail, trying to keep him off the ballot, even trying to kill him. So I think most people could identify with what he was going through. And that's why he has attracted so much attention. But not only here in America, but on the world stage, because the world needs a leader. And America was the leader until this last administration, when we become more or less an embarrassment. The world wants a strong leader. They want some degree of certainty about the future. They want to know who their allies are and that their allies will really support them. They want to know who their enemies are. They want to know all the things that Trump makes absolutely clear. And the other thing I have to say about the win on November the 5th, give credit where credit is due. Um, I think Laura Trump did an amazing job of getting those volunteers to come. She tried to get 100,000. They got 230,000 poll watchers and workers and attorneys. And I think that made a very big difference. There were many attempts to subvert the system, which were caught and terminated in time.
Yeah, and I think what Lara did, I mean, it can't be denied. She she delivered the grassroots effort for President Trump, and then what Charlie Kirk did with Turning Point Action, combine all of that with Scott Presler, Cliff Maloney, all they did in Pennsylvania. I mean, you couldn't have done it without the grassroots effort, spearheaded by those few. But I think you said it best because you basically said that on November 5th, we the people who have power over this country, not the government, not the senators or the White House or the Supreme Court, but we the people gave President Trump a resounding mandate on November 5th of this year to go and fix this country, to make it great again, like he ran on. And his agenda's been pretty clear. But one thing I do want to point out is something that I noticed when I was talking to my peers, young people, is that yes, they were afraid to be drafted. They were afraid of this and that going into war. But if we get to the crux of it, get to the root of it, the reason they were afraid of being drafted or whatever going into war and fighting is because they didn't believe in the leadership of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Because they didn't believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris believed in them. And frankly, that's just weak leadership. And we know the quote where it says, "Strong men create good times, good times create weak men," etc. I mean, this is Joe Biden's been a weak man, and Donald Trump ran as the strong man, and now he's appointing all of these other strong men and women, to the displeasure of Mark Cuban, at least, into his cabinet. His cabinet has basically been filled with superheroes in this cabinet. It's been an all-star team. RFK, HHS, Tulsi Gabbard, DNI, Scott Turner at HUD. A number of these picks are now going through the process of being confirmed. And before we get into what you think they're going to experience, you've experienced that yourself. In 2017, you were being confirmed for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Uh, how did they try to attack you and smear you in that process? And how did you come through that? Then we'll get to what they're going to experience themselves coming up in the next few weeks.
Well, I'm thrilled with the people that President Trump has surrounded himself with. The picks that he put forth are strong, courageous, and importantly, young, energetic people. You know, in the past, we've had a bunch of, they're sometimes good people, but they're old. And, you know, when you go back and you look at the beginnings of our country, these people were young. They were very vigorous, and that's what we need once again. Will they try to smear you? Absolutely. They did everything they could to smear all of Trump's cabinet picks during his first term, including me. They dig and dig and dig and try to find something, and if they can't find anything, they make it up. And even after we got into office and were confirmed, you know, they wouldn't give us our people. I didn't have any deputy secretary for 8 months. Yes. No assistant secretaries for 5 months. Every day was like drinking from the fire hose. And then they could blame you for anything that was going on. Uh, it was really quite ridiculous. And then the legal charges they brought against so many of the cabinet members, including myself, saying that I had inappropriately purchased a $31,000 dining room table, which was completely false. I never purchased the table. And it wasn't a table, it was a complete dining room set of 17 pieces. And that's not an outrageous amount of money at all to spend for something like that. But they tried to paint it as here's somebody who's trying to cut the HUD budget, but at the same time wants to buy a $31,000 table. And it took a IG investigation, which cost the taxpayers over $1 million to prove that I was innocent. Uh, but that's the kind of craziness that people can look forward to. They'll go back and dig up anything. Whether there's truth to it doesn't matter. The fact that they can put it out there and cause doubt, that's all that they're trying to do. So that will happen. There's no question about it. But I think one of the things that happened during this election is that people showed that they're getting immune to gaslighting. And gaslighting will continue, but I think people know how to interpret it now. And I think that's going to inure to the advantage of the good guys.
Yeah, I think that shows their ultimate plan. That it's not just that they want to get rid of this guy or this guy or that guy. They just want to disrupt the whole plan as a whole. And whether you like Matt Gaetz or not, one of the reasons why they attacked him was because he was the most, if we can call it fragile candidate, they had the most ammo against. Then once they take out one person, they don't stop there. They continue moving to one person and then another and then another and then another until they've corrupted the whole plan. And now they moved to Pete Hegseth. After that, if they get Pete Hegseth, which doesn't look like they will, looks like Pete Hegseth will be confirmed by the Senate. But they're just going to continue moving down the list. Pete Hegseth, though, one of the main attacks against him has been that he's an outspoken Christian. He has a cross tattoo on his chest. I think he has another tattoo down his forearm. But he's an outspoken Christian. He's gone on a Christian podcast and to talk about his faith at large. Uh, if you can give Pete Hegseth a word of advice going into these hearings to stay strong in the faith and not to give up, what would it be?
I would tell them, first of all, to be truthful. It's, a temptation for many people in the political arena to pervert the truth a little bit in order to make themselves look good. But the problem is when you do that, then you got to do another one to cover that one. And pretty soon you forget what you said because it's not true. If you always tell the truth remains the truth. You don't have to try to remember what you said 3 months ago. And it's much easier to get your work done under those circumstances. And it's okay to admit that you made a mistake. Uh, you know, drinking causes many, many, many problems. And he has said that he will give up drinking if he's exonerated on all these things. Uh, if I were him, I would say, I'm going to give up drinking no matter what, because it has not served me well. And I simply will remove myself from that temptation. I think that would comfort a lot of people because I think people realize that people do things. None of us is perfect. None of us has a perfect past life. And If we're going to exclude people from jobs because of some imperfection that occurred 20 years ago, um, I don't think anybody's going to be able to serve.
That's a very wise word, yeah. And I mean, scripture tells us that no man's perfect. If you want to call it the failings of Matt Gates or Pete Hegseth or Donald Trump or RFK or any man, just look in the mirror. Remove the log from your own eye. But I want to get into a couple policies that we think that President Trump and his team can enact to restore the American family and really cultivate the family once again in our country. But I've got a copy of your book here that just came out this past year called The Perilous Fight Overcoming Our Culture's War on the American Family. I've read pieces of the book, haven't made it all the way through yet. Got to find time for that. But I watched your episode with Con Carroll that you recorded recently, the podcast episode with Con Carroll, and going through the history of the Roman Republic, what they did wrong, how they destroyed the family, their culture. It looks like we're following down that same trajectory in many ways. I mean, uh, divorce is up through the roof, but birth rates are uh, basically gone. Many people aren't having kids anymore. So how do we fix the family through policies we can actually put into place? Is it something like a child birth tax credit? What do you think? What are the policies we can put into place?
Well, we got to get back to basics. Are there principles that govern our lives and our society? In the early history of America, we had Judeo Christian values. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not envy, honor your parents. You know, we've reached a point where there are those who say, no, you can't say those things. You can't post those things in the schools. You can't teach those things to our children. And everybody gets to be their own judge in terms of what's right and what's wrong. Well, societies that go down that route never tend to end up in a good place. There is such a thing as right and wrong. You can go to the darkest, deepest jungle in Borneo where there's been no missionary and where people don't have a Bible. And guess what? The thief still waits till nighttime to sneak around and steal things. Why? Because he knows it's wrong. There is such a thing as right and wrong. You don't want to be caught doing wrong things. And we need to bring those principles back to our country. You know, th- there's a real issue with family formation that's going on right now. People are not getting married or they're waiting till very late to get married. They're not having children. In 1960, the average births per woman in America was 3.6. Today, it is 1.6. That's a massive decline. And you need 2.1 births per woman just to maintain the population. So we're not even in maintenance position at this stage of the game. And, people say, well, why should I get married? I can just pretty much do what I want. I can go out and have sex with whoever I want to have sex with. I don't have the responsibility of taking care of somebody else or taking care of children. I can do what I want to do. There's a new phenomenon known as dinks, double income, no kids, growing very rapidly because they say, no, we can take all of this money and we can spend it on ourselves and on our own pleasure. Wonder what those people are going to do when they're 85 years old. And there's no kids, there's no grandkids, there's nobody who really cares that much about them. They're not thinking ahead. There's a reason that God created the family structure. And we need to go back to some basic principles and we need to talk about it. We can't allow them to shut us up. We can't allow them to say, you can't discuss your faith. You have to check that at the door. Our faith is a large part of who we are. And our faith teaches us to love your neighbor, not to hate your neighbor, not to cancel your neighbor if they have a different yard sign. And if they have a need, help them. you know, and one of the things that you saw very frequently in the writings of our founders was the phrase, "the common good." What did that mean? That means what's good for everybody, not what's good for this group versus that group, and pitting each other against each other, which they're doing now, dividing us on the basis of race, age, income, religion, gender, you name it, driving wedges, dividing people, and manipulating and controlling them.
And you said it perfect. I've been thinking this. This is when I talked with my mom and my dad, and this is what I've been saying when they asked me to come on as a representative for Gen Z on Fox or Newsmax or whatever. Is that simply we have to go back to the basics because we're all trying to analyze and then solve these complex problems in our society through government. Which, if we try to solve the problems through government, it's going to fail for one because it's government. We need to privatize those solutions. But number two is that if we can't solve this. The only reason we can't solve this is because the foundation is completely gone in our society. And we've lost the morals, we've lost the biblical foundation our country is founded upon, like you said, and we can't do anything else until we restore that. I think that's a beautiful explanation. But you also mentioned that we're being divided upon race and that they've divided us upon that, and then they're discriminating against this one because they chose, this race or this, uh, intersectionality. Because Karl Marx said, "If you're gay, you're more oppressed. If you're a woman, you're more oppressed. If you're black, if you're Asian, you're more oppressed." And at the bottom of the totem pole is the white, straight male who disagrees with Marx. And now they've elevated all of those other people on the basis of their race or their sexuality. I was just talking with Dr. Carol Swain, who I know you know, right before this recording. I had an episode with her a few months ago. But what she's doing for DEI, what is the solution under President Trump to get rid of the DEI? Is it just as simple as taking a sledgehammer to all of the CRT in our classrooms in the education system, or does it go a lot further than slashing all the DEI initiatives in the government? How do we uh, attack that through policies, executive orders, legislation that Trump can push?
Well, the fortunate thing is that our society on its own seems to be coming to the conclusion that DEI does not work. Every week we're seeing another major company saying that they're getting rid of their DEI policies because they realize, everybody realizes over the course of time, that the reason that companies and corporations flourish is because they have good people. If you decide that I just need to check the boxes with the kind of people that I employ, as opposed to the people who are very, very accomplished, you're going to suffer the consequences. And they're seeing that. You look at what's happening in some of the medical schools, UCLA in particular. They were one of the first ones to adopt all these DEI policies. And now they have humongous failure rates of the people who are coming through their programs. And I think they're starting to realize that that may not be the right way to correct the problem. If you have a problem with the number of a certain demographic in your program, maybe it's because they're not being prepared. Maybe you should put a little more emphasis on making sure that the preparation is good. I came from a school system in Detroit that was not particularly strong academically, and that's putting it mildly. But I recognize that as an individual, and I supplement my education. I would go downtown to Wayne State University. I was always in the library there reading for myself. I became a lab assistant in one of the biology labs. I taught myself. Uh, I roamed through the galleries of the Detroit Institute of Arts until I knew every painting, who they painted it, when they were born, what period it represented. I did all these things uh, on my own because you're not going to get that kind of material in a public school in the inner city of Detroit. but it doesn't mean that you can't do it. And that's what we need to instill in people again, the can-do spirit, which is something that is magnificent about America. You can be born in Appalachia, like our vice president elect. You can be born in the inner city. You can be born in any place, but you don't have to let that define where you're going. It's not where you came from, it's where you're going that counts. And that's called the can do spirit. America used to be the country with the can do spirit. It's becoming this country with the what can you do for me spirit. That's not a good spirit. That's socialism. And that always leads to a decline.
And that leads directly into my next question that I had for you, because when I talk to my peers, I talk to young people, one of the things they say is, "I can't live the American dream now. This, and that, I can't do it." But what you're saying is that the essence of the American dream, the only thing that keeps it alive and that propels the American dream is a can-do spirit in each individual. This isn't from the government. This isn't handed to someone. This is almost what Ronald Reagan was referring to. We said freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must it's not passed on through the bloodstream. It must be fought for and defended from one generation to the next. This is passed down from parents, from grandparents to their kids and grandchildren. That they can actually do whatever they want in America because it's the land of the free. It's the land of opportunity. And you're a picture of that. Dr. Carol Swain is a picture of that.
Right.
And these people that we look to are pictures of it, that we can actually do it. So if you could talk to young people directly right now, how can they develop the can-do spirit and actually believe that it's not just something that we're handed, it's not just something that life isn't something that's just ahead of us that we can be passed on. It's something that we have to work for. It's only the hard work that gets us where we want. What's your message?
Well, the thing that made it clear to me that it was the hard work is when I started reading books about successful people. My mother imposed upon me a rule that I had to read 2 books a week, because I was doing so poorly in school. And I didn't like it at first, but after a while, I began to enjoy reading about these people of accomplishment. And I came to the realization that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. And that made an enormous difference in my life. I remember one of the first books I read was by Booker T. Washington called Up from Slavery. He was born a slave and became a highly respected educator in our country. Talk about the pathway to that. I recently had a young woman on my podcast who was a refugee from Cambodia, uh, where communists had taken over. Her family had fled. She was talking about the oppression that was occurring in that country. And when she came here, she didn't speak any English, but she saw opportunities and she learned English and she went to school and she went to college and the graduate school, became an engineer, started her own engineering firm because a lot of refugees and people who come here from other places do extremely well. And the reason is they look and they say, "What? You mean all I got to do is study? All I got to do is work hard? That's all I got to do, and all of this can be open to me?" Whereas a lot of our people who are born here, I don't have any opportunities. Everybody's taking my chances away from me. I'm a victim. If you think you're a victim, you are a victim. That's a state of mind. And we got to reinstill that can do spirit in people and our young people and help them to realize that they are the ones who determine their future. No one else determines your future.
I think you're completely right. And it's something my parents trying to instill in me. I come from a family of small business owners for generations upon generations back. They're all small business owners. And they understood that the paycheck isn't coming on Friday if we don't accomplish this, and that this week. And they broke it down into each and every day. If I don't accomplish this morning, if I don't get this done in the afternoon, if I don't tell my guys to go out and do this, so that I can work with them on this tomorrow, I mean, it all adds up. It's the small things, small decisions in life And Scripture says, "If you're faithful in the little, you can be faithful in the much." So when you're tested with the small challenges, do it, do it well, do it with all that you have, and do it for the glory of God, as Scripture says as well. And before we wrap up of the final question, I wanted to run this by you. You're from Detroit, in the inner city. There is where you grew up, and somebody called me the other day, talking about these policies we can initiate to cultivate the family, and one of those things is being pro-life. We need to be pro-life again. Uh, eradicate the evil that is abortion, murdering babies. But we can talk about that later, because today there's about a dozen pro-life advocates and activists who are in jail. One of which is, I believe she was a Catholic nun. Don't she's a very uh, spiritual, religious, and Christian woman. She's a God-fearing woman who actually taught the Sunday school class for a friend of mine in Linden, Michigan, is where she's from, outside of Detroit, just north of there, I believe, who's in prison on charges, I think from DC and maybe Tennessee, for being at these Planned Parenthoods and protesting. These are the people who the Biden administration has targeted. Just wondering if you've heard anything about that, uh, or if you've heard anything from President Trump about what he's planning to do, because I know he commented on that this summer at the Faith and Freedom Coalition, where he spoke in DC as well. I wonder if you heard anything there.
Well, isn't it interesting that they would arrest an elderly woman, completely nonviolent, who happens to be sitting on the sidewalk in front of an abortion facility, and yet people who clearly broke the law by being on the property of the Supreme Court justices and protesting, they have no consequences whatsoever. Uh, and I think it's that unequal application of the law which many people in our country on both sides of the aisle find offensive and reacted to on November the 5th, and will continue to react until we get the right kinds of people in. I think President Trump will very quickly pardon that woman and others who have been unjustly incarcerated. You look at all the people in the January 6th thing who just went into the Capitol, who were among the crowd, didn't do anything, engaged in no violent acts, but because they were there, they're sentenced and put in jail. Um, and at the same time, they know many of the people who were involved in a lot of the riots where people's property were destroyed, where people were killed, particularly in the summer of 2020. Nothing happens to them whatsoever. Uh,
Yeah, nothing happens to them, and yet, these elderly grandmas, there's a few, I think there's 2 that are 30 or 35, 40, in that range, are in prison as well for the same kinda thing. They all got arrested about the same time, during Joe Biden's tenure. I believe this woman's name, who's from Linden, Michigan, is Heather Idioni. I think she's about 60 or 70, but they've mistreated her in prison. Like the belt that they have around her, the chain, they've continued to make it tighter and tighter and tighter, and threaten her with more, if she doesn't do exactly, as they say. I mean, it's absolute shame. And this is what the Justice Department, justice system in America has come to. You see, when you walk, like you look at the Supreme Court in DC, when you're walking by, you look, it says equal justice under the law at the top of the Supreme Court. You got to get back to that. But I've got one final question for you, Doc. The name of the show is America Don't Give Up. The name of the book is America Don't Give Up. You've got a simple message to people, so you could talk to my generation directly, or Americans, and tell them not to give up one thing. What would it be?
I would tell them, make sure that you know the history of our nation, not the distorted or the rewritten history, but what is our real history, because it really is very inspirational. And your history gives you your identity. And your identity is that thing upon which your beliefs are based. And if you break that chain, you become like a leaf blowing in the wind, so easily manipulated by any breeze that comes by. That's what's happening to those young people that you see on those college campuses who are running around in support of Hamas, who are supporting terrorists, who are saying death to America. They have no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what they are supporting. And it's very important to inform yourself. It makes all the difference in the world. I grew up in places like Detroit, Boston, New Haven, Ann Arbor, and Baltimore, all very liberal places. And therefore, guess what? I was a liberal. Um, but then I did something that liberals aren't supposed to do. I listened to a conservative. I listened to Ronald Reagan. I said, wow, this guy sounds just like my mother. And, I started thinking for myself. That's the key. Think for yourself. Don't allow other people to tell you who you are or what you should think. Open your eyes, open your ears, observe, pray for guidance and wisdom, and you will do just fine.
Think for yourself and think big, as you wrote in one of your beginning books, one of your first books that came out. And I don't think you won't know this, but I have an older brother who's 10 years older than me. When he was born in Salisbury, Maryland, in 1995, he was born blue, and his umbilical cord was wrapped around him. So he had to be sent back for these tests and everything. And one of the paperwork end up at your desk in Johns Hopkins, and you were actually the one who signed off on my brother's birth in 1995,
Mhm.
saying that he was okay to go and that everything was going to be all right. And today he's a lawyer in Wilmington, Delaware, doing business and corporate work. So I've got to say thank you from my family to you for that and what you did there.
Praise the Lord. It's wonderful to hear that. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm sure you get those occurrences quite a bit nowadays.
Almost
You've touched so many people throughout your life.
almost every place I go, there's somebody who has a connection, a story, because I did 15,000 operations. So
Yeah.
you can imagine. That's a lot of people.
Well, thank you for all of them. One time for all. Thank you. Um, well, thank you for coming on as well. I think everyone's enjoyed your wisdom, your advice, and all that you've done for our country, the service to our country, whether the private sector and the neuro field, or whether as Secretary of HUD, or now what you're doing to educate the next generation at ACI. Thank you. Thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. And I'm very encouraged when I see young people like you who are real patriots. Keep up the good work.
Absolutely. Thank you.